Introducing BalanceWise IQ, the game changer for modern workplaces. Powered by cutting-edge AI, it goes beyond just managing tasks. Imagine predictive insights that help prevent attrition before it starts. It's like having a modern-day idea box where every voice is heard. Plus, peer recognition tools boost engagement, making employees feel valued and connected. BalanceWise IQ fosters transparency, builds trust, and creates a culture where everyone thrives. Ready to transform your workplace? Experience the future of employee engagement with BalanceWise IQ.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey!
Say hi to AI, human intelligence, plus artificial intelligence. BalanceWise IQ uses AI to guide employee engagement, boosting retention and productivity. Employees get weekly pulse checks designed by behavioral psychologists that help you engage with your employees. No more quiet quitting. It's time to say hi to AI.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. My name is Tim Keefe, and I'm the CEO of SDSS Global and also the CEO of Transform CX Incorporated here in California. And it's my privilege today to be the moderator for a really valuable session, I believe, on artificial intelligence and employee experience. We've heard nothing over the last year. Well, we've heard a lot of things in the news, but there's been one theme when it comes to the area of work in management and leadership, and that's been the impact of artificial intelligence. We've heard all kinds of stories and predictions and hype and some pretty dramatic announcements by companies like Spotify that, for example, we're not going to hire anybody else until we can prove that that job can't be done by an artificial intelligent agent. And then we have other end of the spectrum where we have companies like Verizon that have come out and described how they're using AI to drive or enable their employees to do more and be more effective and move from being cost centers to profit centers. So again, a lot of conversation, a lot of different storytelling. And I'm proud today to be here with an amazing panel of people, Andreas, Rosanne, and Trent. And we're going to jump into this conversation. Again, the purpose of this is not necessarily to lean in on one side or the other, but to really talk about what it means and what we're seeing as the actual practical and real life applications and what's that meaning in the employee experience category. So, and plus, I really want to do a quick call out before we get started to the SDSS production team who've done an amazing job getting us ready for this and supporting us in the background. So with that, I'd like to reach out to my panelists here and let them introduce each other. Maybe we can start with Rosanne.
Hi, Tim. My name's Rosanne Werner, and I'm previously with Coca-Cola leading their data and AI mindset and culture program. Now I'm the CEO of XcelerateIQ. So we help organizations build their data and AI capabilities in a way that fosters real changes in terms of mindset and culture. So our approach focuses on the human aspect of transformation. So we use neuroscience, behavioral principles to shape how we learn smarter and faster and how we embed these learnings into habits and behaviors. So it's all about empowering the people on the data and AI journey. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks, Rosanne. We're really, really excited to get more time with you. You've been a great guest on our podcast and just love what you're publishing every day in LinkedIn. It's just so right on. Trent, I'd like to bring you on stage and give us all a chance to hear about you.
Hi, thanks, Tim. Yeah, my name is Trent Salvaggio. I am by training a research scientist, but applied now for the last probably 20 years. My career has really focused around broadly digital transformation and understanding the effects of technology on strategy and people and how we can create new value by pulling different levers in different organizations to extract value. Now I focus almost exclusively in an emerging field known as people analytics. The quantitative study of human behavior, especially as it relates to human behavior in the world of work and what that means for the employee experience in the future of work.
There's probably a few parents out there who probably be pretty interested in some of those tools and learnings as well. But that's for a different podcast or a different forum at another time. Thanks, Trent. And again, always great to have you. And again, also you've been a guest with us on our podcast, and always appreciate your time and your viewpoint is amazing. I think coming to this with data in an area where it was all gut reaction to everything. And last but not least, I'd like to bring on Andreas, our Chief Experience Officer here at Transform CX. Maybe you'll come up with something interesting to share with us during your introduction.
I don't know, but I won my $5 Starbucks gift card you promised me to show up here. Is it live? Are we live right now?
It's in the mail. It's in the mail.
Oh, okay. No, seriousness. Andreas Wieman, CXO, Transform CX. Huge fan of Rosanne and Trent. And just helping people. How can we help people with all of the challenges that we're seeing right now? Because I think most people would agree there's a plethora of challenges out there right now. So figuring this out kind of, I don't know, it's very interesting to me. And I like the satisfaction of seeing other people, come to the same conclusion by using technology, people, process, data to do it. I think it's a repeatable pattern regardless of the circumstances. And I think there's a lot of variable circumstances out there right now that need a lot of help with people, process, data, and technology. So looking forward to the panel discussion.
That's great. Thanks, Andreas. Those of you who listen to our podcast know that we usually introduce ourselves as co-conspirators. So really exciting to have this panel here today. And I think let's just jump into the question of the day. From each of you, and I'll start in the same order that we did introductions. How do you see how AI has changed the workplace so far this year? Particularly at the day-to-day, not the hype level, but what does it mean at the day-to-day level for, whether it's executives, managers, or more importantly, the people who are actually doing the work? So maybe Rosanne, you can jump in here and guide us in a good solid direction before we get off the rails.
I think in terms of the day-to-day, we're seeing a lot of probably baby steps in terms of how can AI automate some of the routine tasks? So things like meeting summaries, how do we go from a blank sheet of paper to starting some brainstorming with the AI? How do we help them draft emails or scheduling? So I think, are we seeing baby steps in most of the organizations in terms of kind of embedding that AI through? And then you've got the other stream in terms of, okay, well, how can we automate some of the processes side of things? How do we use AI to personalize support because of the ability to be able to tailor certain content to certain audiences? So I think it's trickling in through. I think there's different buckets between how people have adopted AI, depending on which bucket you're in.
And a million questions come into my mind as you end on that note. But Trent, your thoughts on AI so far this year.
I'll echo what Rosanne said here in that even within the last 3 months, we're seeing AI start to be deployed, not just as a tool for productivity, but for a movement that's changing the lived experiences that people have at work. And with the rate of just adoption, even outside of the workplace, we're seeing that start to trickle as people become more familiar with the technology, are starting to understand how it can be applied to their jobs, and starting to see people think differently about where it can be applied, and I think even more importantly, how AI is rolled out within organizations. That's going to be the key differentiator there between these really successful launches of AI in very specific niche organizations and the ones that are met with resistance and therefore low adoption rates.
Yeah, again, I'm just thinking about, and we'll get into that here because I think you're getting at the point of what is deployment look like, right? And I think it's coming in various flavors. So Andreas, what do you see happening?
With the other panelists here, surprise, surprise. And I think to Trent's point, Rosanne, you and I talked about this on a podcast. I'm pointing to the boxes on my screen, just in case anybody's curious. We just had a podcast a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about, and Trent kind of goes back to your adoption. There's so much excitement out there around AI. And at all levels of the organization, you get a lot of CEOs who are like, oh, let's automate everything and, save all this money on labor and blah. And then you got humans who are like, man, this can help me do my daughter, for example, is a real conversation I had with her, picking her up from ballet last night. They have like 4 weeks of school left. I showed her how to help prompt write a 2-minute 4 people play for her theater class in school, and figuring out, which different prompting, because I'm also a nerd, so I like playing with this just to see what it does, but showing her how it can help with using the human intelligence, the side that makes sense to her and not squash the creativity. So now she's super interested. Of course, she's watching like, not TikTok, but like other videos and like CapCut or whatever. So they're getting into AI. And then you have different generations, I think, are seeing different aspects of where AI could be applied. I think what we'll talk about today, especially with this esteemed kind of panelists here, how can we actually operationalize that to help the people? Because that's kind of what we're here for, is how does the AI help the people? How does human intelligence get augmented with artificial intelligence? And I think we've seen theoretical approaches so far this year. I think we're going to get more into how do we actually pragmatically implement them.
Yeah, well, so let me tee up this a little bit differently, but I think we're all on the same page, right? Like there's a lot of hype about it. People are both, we talk about excitement, but there's also terror. It doesn't help when organizations have come out publicly and say, we're not going to hire human beings anymore unless we can prove that the AI can't do their job, which of course, then maybe I'm just kind of think about it, but if nobody has a job, who's going to be there to buy the products and services that these companies are offering? But that's probably for a different conversation. But I also think about what you guys were saying about deployment. I mean, there's this formal deployment of AI into an organization, which can be as simple as we're going to buy Copilot and we want everybody to use it to create PowerPoint presentations or whatever. And that was actually a study done second half of last year. Didn't go very well, but it was very interesting because one of the few studies or a few articles that I read where they actually talk about costs. And I think there's that element of AI that doesn't seem to be in all the hype. There's a lot of, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. We've got large language models, we've got small language models. We were just on a presentation yesterday about how do you develop some security around all this stuff that you're dumping into this tool that's going out to the cloud. Rosanne, we did a great podcast on what we call shadow AI, which is this informal deployment of AI tools into an organization where, I don't know, people might dump a big report into it and say, how do I analyze this? And what markets should I align my go-to-market strategy around? I don't know who would do that. I just did that last night. That's why I'm thinking about it. But, and of course, all of that is sitting on somebody else's servers in the cloud. Whether that I care or not, that's a different story, but it's out there. And other companies are dumping internal material into this. So given all of that, I also want to tee up another piece of data. And this is from the Gallup Global Engagement Report that just came out last week. And we quoted a lot last year. And we're going to quote it even more this year because things got worse. The global level of employee engagement is now in the low 20s, 20%. That means your labor dollars as an organization, approximately 75 to 80% of your labor dollars are not being used efficiently. If you had a factory that was operating at 25% effectiveness, you'd burn it down. So we have a big problem here, which is, and I know that's not the topic, but I think it is the topic, which is this employee experience. We have to find a way to get people engaged. And maybe AI is not a threat to people, but is actually a way to help them be more effective, feel more engaged, and feel like they're not doing just drone work. So let me tee that back up to you a little bit. And I know this is a slightly different question than maybe you were prepared for, but what do you think the most effective ways that we're going to see AI come into the workplace? And get as specific as you want, but I think this is kind of nuts and bolts what I'm excited about. Rosanne?
I'd say we need to, we're talking about AI fatigue before, in terms of there's just so many tools And I think that's kind of maybe adding a bit of that pressure in terms of there's that kind of productivity engagement pressure, but then there's also that pressure of so many tools out there. How do we keep up with the changes before you see the value that's coming out of these tools? So in terms of preparing employees on this part here is like, how do you help them go, okay, well, what are you doing in your workflows at the moment? What are the specific, mundane, repetitive tasks of your job that AI can take, and you can fact check it and improve your prompt engineering so it does it quicker and faster and more objectively, and then carve out what are the parts of the roles that are specifically human skills that then are more creative and more strategic, that are more engaging work, and put it to the employees like that in terms of, okay, well, what are the stuff that takes a lot of your chunk of your time and is not actually really that engaging? How can we help? How can we upskill you guys, reskill you guys to use AI to take away that repetitive task, so you do have more chunk of the time to do more of the creative stuff and the more fun stuff, the more value-adding stuff that AI can't replace?
I think you're right on. And who knows what that work is? Is that at the executive level? I don't think they know what.
Yeah. Oh, I think you've got to apply that to all levels in terms of what are you've got to take that approach with all levels. You can't just say, execs are exempt from this, because you don't want them spending their time on repetitive tasks, and they need to lead by example as well for the rest of the organizations to embrace that.
Agreed. Trent, your thoughts on effective implementation? What does that look like?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because the answer that I would have given you 6 months ago is different from the answer I'll give you today, and different from the answer that you'll probably hear in 3 months. And here's why. So what we've seen so far is, at least on a broad scale, a lot of superficial implementations coming in and saying things and utilizing to rewrite your emails, right? To streamline a little bit of basic workflow, because organizations are looking at this, say, how do I get some value out of AI, but still mitigate the risk that's out there? And these are the easiest, simplest things, but those also aligned really well with the quality and the strengths of the models that were available 6 months ago. When we look at the models today, they're starting to evolve. And from my perspective, from a people analytics perspective, the amount of improvement that we see in its ability to go out and do some really advanced analytics that before would have taken a trained PhD level specialist to do, now opens up the availability of organizations to tap into these new abilities that are driven precisely by the development of these new models. And in 6 months from now, they'll be able to tap into new things. But it takes an organization that's really forward thinking to be able to identify where within their specific organization not only they can deploy these, but where they should deploy them.
Yeah, I like the can, just because you can. Then the follow question is the should you? And I think that's a really powerful question that every organization should ask. Andreas, go ahead.
So it was a touch on something really important there too, was that the need for a human in the loop, right? Just because AI can go out there and do these really advanced analytics that might have taken me a day, I can now do in an hour. They still require that level of human ingenuity to derive the insights, to derive the value out of them. And I don't think that the AI models are going to be able to get to that level of ingenuity and creativeness and innovation anytime soon.
I completely agree. I think it goes back to something we used to talk about in business intelligence all the time, which is there's a lot of data. There's huge amounts of data now. And now, of course, with Gen AI, we have the ability to search and analyze just massive amounts of data in seconds. The question is, what question are you asking, and to what intent? And that's what I think about. Like, for example, and Andreas, I'm going to give you time in a second. I can see the look I'm getting. But yeah, it's that. What's the question? So, Andreas, and I know you and I have talked about this extensively, and I know you have some great examples where I think companies are really doing this in a more appropriate way.
Yeah, I mean, one, I got to back up everything that Trent said on just everything. I don't want to repeat everything. And I want to make sure I give the moderator time to be a panelist member now, paneling, apparently. But like where I see AI being practically implemented and being measured, not superficial, like Trent's saying, I still go back to how can we augment, I'm going to sound a bit commodity based when I say this, and I don't mean it like this, but if we go back to the human factor, how can we help the human factor? There's still a huge dependency on the human factor. I don't care if you're actually coding in the background, your machine learning models that are producing the newer models for your AI. There's still a human that's doing that. Yeah, they may be able to code it right so you can replicate it quicker. But you still have a human that's doing that. So if you go back and look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I've been using this for about 20 years. How can we get to the physiological safety that people need? And how can we get to where companies, organizations, I don't want to say companies, but organizations say, okay, here's what we need from employees. Here's the outcomes that are going to be good for the organization and our customers and our clients. And then the employees say, well, here's the outcomes that are going to be good for me to be as productful as I can. I have a problem saying that word. To get all the way up to the self-actualization of the top of the pyramid of the hierarchy of needs. And so how can you get to maybe do a fake Venn diagram here with my hands? How can you intersect both of those? That's where I think there's such a huge opportunity with AI that I think a lot of organizations are missing, because you have a way to be able to obtain even more data. There's tons of data that's out there now. That's been the case for a couple of decades, to be frank, but it's usually been measured a little bit differently or pulled from a different source. Now you have more humans working than ever before. As you mentioned in the Gallup State of the Global Workplace, they're pretty pissed off and disengaged, but there's still more humans. And now with digitization, there's more tracking of what those humans do. So you can look for variation. As Trent's saying, if you extract all of that, run your analysis on that, you can look for standard deviation patterns and trends within the humans being asked to do what they're performed to do, what they're trained to do, et cetera. You can look for areas of opportunity for deficiencies or deviations there. But then you can organically get information from your employees on how they feel about stuff. Because guess what? If they go out on a lunch break and they watch something on the news that mentally, hits them, you think they're going to come back and be like, oh, here, I'm clocking back in. So compartmentalize that. I'm going to leave that at the door of my lunchbox, and it's not going to affect me at all. We know that's not. In fact, it's probably gotten a little bit more impactful, and it's reflected in the Gallup survey. So how can we leverage AI to be able to organically collect what our people are thinking about, how they feel about things, analyze that, and then have the prediction model come back out, give that to the executives like Rosanne was talking about. They're paid the big bucks. Let them figure out, how to start solutioning this and how to start talking to frontline staff with a lot more level of authenticity, but do it in a data-driven decision-making type of way rather than guesswork. Or this is what I did 10 years ago when I got promoted into this role. Well, all these variables have changed. They're not static. So how can you apply that same methodology and framework to be successful? I think it's the same thing with proliferation and adoption of AI.
So I think you're teeing up a great question, and like bring this back to the panel. How do we either measure or how do we engage with the employees to make sure they're part of this, right? Because otherwise, Trent, I think you mentioned it, they're going to be, adoption will be very low because it's seen as a threat versus as an enabler. So what does that look like in real life? And I'll use the example. I think last year, I forget the name of the company, but they deployed Copilot to several hundred employees with the goal of really trying to measure the cost benefit versus the result. And it was very low. At the end of 6 months, they'd spent a couple of $100,000 US, and the feedback was they were getting 6th grade level of output. Now, Trent, to your point, those same models a year later are significantly more advanced and better, and the outputs are better. But still, how does that feel and look to an individual or to an organization? Yet we all know, like I'm sure everybody on this panel uses one of the AI tools probably every day in some shape, manner, or form, whether it's writing emails, job descriptions, or analyzing a report. We all do it, it's a tool, but how does that look in the workplace, and how does that tie back to engagement? So, I mean, Rosanne, what do you're always about this. I mean, actually, both of you, this is what you're talking about every day.
Yeah, I'd probably start with, so for your work, for your business, what are the key strategic goals? So for example, at Coca-Cola, it's like we wanted to sell more fizzy drink, and we wanted to produce it in a more efficient manner, cost reduction. So you've got the two workforce, your commercial and your supply chain are your kind of key engines. So how do we use the data to, how do we help our commercial workforce sell more to the customers? How do we help them understand what the customers and the consumers want with the data? And how do we tie in what are the the tasks they need to do that achieves a business goal that helps them, get more pay, get more business, help the company grow more. But then how do we tie what AI can do to what they do on a day-to-day basis that then achieve those goals? Because if you're doing what you love and you're doing more of it because AI is taking the grunt work, and you're seeing it in your business growth, you're seeing it in your career growth, you're seeing it in your team's growth, that's how you can tap into that kind of engagement more on a realistic, relatable manner.
Yes, yes, and yes. I would be my thought. Trent?
So to put a little bit different spin on this, we're talking a lot about data, and one of the reasons that we haven't seen a lot of deeper adoption on here is because those models that we have built right now, those big factor models, we don't have enough identified factor analysis to understand people, to recreate, to make a digital twin of people. There's too much complexity there. But if you saw earlier this week, Microsoft is taking a big leap at this, and they are now putting in an embedded layer of data on human data. So it'll be able to look at the type of work that you're doing within Microsoft Teams and start to derive and distill out what skills you might have, what kind of work you're really good at. And it does it all passively. Now, there's parts of this that I love because it's going to give me so much more data that I've never been able to have before. And it's not self-report data, right? It's actually observed behavior data. So it's not somebody's telling me I'm really good at A. It's their work proving that they are really good at skill A. Mm-hmm. I love that. But from an implementation standpoint, it scares me. I say people analytics, and I use my tagline, it's people data for good. And we never use any of this data to go out there and create cases to fire people. We use the data to create new opportunities for them to learn and grow in their environment or organization. People data for good. But what scares me on this a little bit is how sure can we be in the quality of the data that it really is indicative of what it's saying it is? And then also, where do we stop on this passive data collection? From an end user perspective, how are my employees going to feel knowing that everything they do, we're watching and tracking, and when does that become a little too big brother?
Yeah. I think the line's been crossed in a lot of places, and I think that you brought up the issue is what's the intent. We saw this return to office, right? Like, oh, you need to be in the office 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. We're going to count badge swipes. We're going to do motion detectors in the room so we know where you are in the conference room, at your desk, whatever. But what was the point of that? The point was to measure attendance. And Andreas and I talk about this all the time, which is that seems like a very odd metric for a business versus, to your point, Rosanne, what are the business outcomes that you're trying to achieve? I always think about growth, which is usually sales. I'm adding new clients. I think about client retention. How do I keep the customers I have? And also, how do I keep the employees I have that contribute to that customer retention? And then you have, the ongoing effort to improve profitability, which is kind of our whole methodology of stop doing stupid stuff, which is, hey, if you're looking at a production line and you've got 100 steps in it, every step comes under inspection, and maybe I don't need 100 steps, I need 80 steps. And this is Henry Ford all over again, right? It's just with different tools. So, Andreas, I don't, you have a lot on this, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to be such a panel member on, but we're all passionate about this.
Yeah, I forgot what the question was, though. Can you, I'm kidding. So back to your comment about having good AI adoption, though. Imagine if we, in a world where some of these models were trained on this. You can't see it because I got a blurred background, but these are Stop Doing Stupid Stuff books, suite of books that talk about practical implementation and figuring out where to start from. And I think Trent brought up a really good point that I'm very passionate about too, is we have all of this data, and there's the ability to collect even more data now with the passive data collection on the human behavior. Now, humans, you'll see in my book, Soft Skills, I open with humans are the largest, I forget exactly what I said, but like we introduce the largest amount of variation and unpredictability in the entire universe. And so, yeah, there's data collection methods that have never been around before, but there's still so much that it's really hard to predict holistically. But if you have a structure, like I kind of equated to, I'm in the US, right? So driving in the US, you have a set of laws, rules, and you get trained, you get a license. Why do we have accidents? Why do we have people that speed? Why do we have people that, and I'm in Florida and everybody's moving here, they stop like 5 car lengths away from the other person behind them, and they unnecessarily create traffic that results in low speed impact crashes that police got to get dispatched for, that I got to pay extra taxes for. I think about all this stuff while I'm driving. So yeah, take my advice with a grain of psychoticness, but all of these patterns, they all have an effect on what humans do and human behavior. So in a place of business, when you're trying to get to outcomes, and I think I'm going to say, and anybody on the panel can disagree with me or in the comments can disagree with me, but I think the structures, we've gotten complacent. And so the structures around what I would call objectively measuring outcomes at every employee level, whether it's a frontline person or it's the CEO themselves, I think we've gotten complacent with considering what is success. I think it's way, way too subjective. And so now when you're trying to train models, to Trent's point, you're training it on, what as data heads call garbage in, garbage out. And so that's part of why I think these models don't have a human-centric kind of direction, even with process and procedure, because even knowledge management system and SOP systems, they're completely unhygienic too. So again, to Trent's comment, it depends on what's being fed in, the level of integrity of that data. That's where I think a lot of organizations got to start and just say, okay, the easiest place to start, listen to your people. You can do that in a very digital way. BalanceWise IQ, that is our sponsor for this today. It's an AI-driven employee listening post. Every single week, you get to tell your employees get to tell you how they feel about stuff, and it measures autonomy, as Trent was talking about, in 7 other dimensions. That's a simple, easy way to start. Within 24 hours, literally, we can stand that up and start collecting data that is volunteered by your employees that let you know how they feel about things. That's an easy way to start. There's more complex implementations that we can talk about, but I think you need to, like Rosanne said, get at the base of it. What are you trying to do to achieve success? And look at it in almost micro segments of what do you want to do? Oh, I want to sell more. I'm gonna start using fizzy soda. Usually we say soda or pop, but fizzy soda, that's really cool. We're gonna sell more fizzy soda at Coca-Cola, right? Okay, well, let's micro look at each of the employees that are part of that process and how can we make it more relatable to them and engage with them. Because according to the State of the Global Workplace by Gallup, the engagement is thriving, right? It's really good. It's not. So how can you engage with each of the employees along that process and augment it with AI? Start there. Quit trying to be like, all right, let's just do an automated robot factory and it'll produce unlimited amounts of fizzy soda. That's the lazy way to think, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more. And I as we were talking, I think about engagement is an interesting word. And what does that what does that look like? You know, I mean, we talk about quiet quitting was a big topic during the pandemic, and it's not a new topic. We've seen it for decades. But what's really powerful, I think, and you don't see it as often as we should, is how do we help people find their joy in the work they do? Because Trent, I love the comment about, oh, we're going to measure what you do in teams and therefore build a profile of your strengths and weaknesses from a skill perspective, which sounds extremely big brotherish, right? And that's assuming that what I'm doing in teams is reflective of what I have passion about. Because what we are also seeing is a huge number of people, particularly Gen Z and millennials, they all have side hustles, or they want to have a side hustle, which is their passion, which might be reaction videos, which I have to admit I don't quite get, but they're extremely popular and people make a lot of money off it. But whatever that passion is, and I was reading an article, those of you might be basketball fans, here in the Bay Area, we have the Warriors, and a guy named Steph Curry is a pretty phenomenal guy, great basketball player. But what his teammates talk about all the time is they don't talk about his leadership and blah, blah, blah. They talk about how he brings joy to what he does. And he's a 37-year-old, plays like he's a 12-year-old in the schoolyard. And it comes across. And I think, you know, as we talk about this tool, AI, right? It's powerful, can make your life easier, can also destroy people's lives. You know, it's like any tool misused can create as much havoc as it creates value. But how do we translate that into allowing people to create joy? So I like your point, Rosanne, about how do we take the grunt work, the non-exciting work off somebody's plate so they can focus on what they like. And you know, think about salespeople. Salespeople hate to fill out to populate their sales automation tool. They just universally, it's kind of like a big problem. So how do we allow salespeople to do what they love to do, which is talk to people and engage them about whatever product they're selling? And I just use that as one example. So maybe I'd like to end the question is, you know, maybe switch it a little bit. Like, how do we use AI, not in this kind of very formulaic way, but maybe we take a step back and think about how do we bring joy to the workplace? Because when people are happy and they're getting engaged, it gets really, really interesting what happens. And sometimes companies, I think, have to step back and allow that joy to happen, even if it may be a little bit off the quote unquote business plan. Because if you can improve people's engagement from 21% to 80%, and it costs you 5% of your revenue to do that, well, holy crap, that seems like a pretty straightforward investment. Anyway, let's think about this, because I'd love to end on this note. Like, how does AI help us bring joy to the workplace? Ms. Rosanne?
I love that. I think with going back to what Trent was saying, is like, how do we use AI to sift through the sentiment analysis and in quite a objective manner, like a large amount of sentiment data in an objective manner, and getting those reports, and then finding those, I like to call it, the sweet spots of people, what drives them, what makes them happy, what are their personality types, what are their communication types, and really pull all these enablers that help them be engaged at work. So maybe they like being spoken to in a certain way. They like this type of work, and this type of personality likes this type of engagement. So how do you use the data and pull all those levers to really pull out the sweet spots? And I think that also ties in with kind of the remuneration and the reward system. Maybe some people aren't driven by money; they're driven by the intrinsic motivations. So how do you pull those reinforcement engagements, motivations, when you found the sweet spots? And then that probably generates more data in terms of what worked, what didn't work, and then allow the managers or leaderships to kind of tweak their approach as well.
Trent, your thoughts?
I'm glad you asked this question, because for me, this is probably the most exciting part of it. So I come at this as a self-professed geek data head. And I love everything that we can do with all the data. But at the end of the day, it's still about people, right? When I look at it from a business leader's perspective, all the data in the world is great, but if I can't translate that back to something actionable for the people on the front lines, it doesn't matter. And with the advances that we've seen in some of these newer models and some of the advancements I think that we'll see within the next 6 months, I really see an end to the one-size-fits-all employee journey. And that we'll be able to create these employment paths that are no longer just predefined linear. You go from job A to job B to job C, to a matrix of interconnected skills that allow people to create jobs that allow them to do not only what they're good at, but what they're passionate about, and can be able to connect those to right now what may be disparate outcomes across the organization. Right. And when we start thinking about that, that's not just the recreation of work. That's not just the future of work. That's the future of everything that we do. I mean, when we talk about, we've talked a lot about the only 20% of people who are engaged. I think the even more important aspect or stat was that there were 18% of people were actively disengaged. Wow. You know, and how, I mean, you've got so much ability there to go in there and make an immediate difference, to move those people from being disengaged to maybe just, I don't hate this job. And AI is going to allow us to create those personalized experiences and personalized journeys to get people there and to keep them there for longer. That's the exciting part for me.
All right. Mr. Andreas, sir.
Yeah, apparently if I can hit mute here on my Mac. No, I could not, if you guys are seeing me, I had this stupid big grin on my face because everything Rosanne and Trent said just right now, 100% agree with. And I think there are going to be advancements around there, and I think you're going to see the adoption get better for the employees because there's not an alternative. There's so much trackable data points now. You want to talk about that? Go and look at, and Tim, you said this kind of earlier, when companies are spending these enormous amounts of money on AI, and I'm sure like people that are actually in the industry are like, what is that? What does that mean? Like, give me the definition of AI, like from a business perspective and a line item of what it's a tech stack. That's all that it is. It's a complicated, newer tech stack, don't get me wrong. But when companies get to a point that they can, if they're publicly traded and they have to use in the US, the SEC disclosure laws, right? Whatever the form filings are, 10, I think it is 10K or something like that. Why aren't they talking about, yeah, we spent X amount on AI. Here's the ROI that we got back on it. Here's the, yeah, we're doing it for our employees. Well, here's the labor cost savings we have. You know, there's no specificity that's there. Once I see a publicly traded company introduce some specificity and detail around it, I'll get excited that it's not smoke and mirrors and that they have like one obscure AI project going on that is revolutionary. You know what I mean? Even the ones that come out with this bombastic claims of, oh yeah, we're gonna do, what is that article, Tim, that you found the other day where I forget the university, if it was Stanford or one of the unis here, they created a fictitious company that was completely ran by AI bots. It was a freaking disaster, from finance to sales to whatever the case was. And so I think if you start at the human, quit trying to what we call ocean boil or find that silver bullet. If you start with the humans right now, and like Trent just said a second ago, if someone's happy, guess what? They're going to show up more. Like Rosanne said, if they show up more and they're happy doing what they're doing, the level of focus and effort they're going to exude is going to be so much higher. It's all measurable. All of it is measurable if you just have the right structure in place, and then share that back frequently with the employees, the ones that are making the companies all the money, right? You should have a good level of transparency as much as possible. Like, I'm not an idiot too. You know, I've had a little bit of experience in my time with, I don't know, managing P&L of about $250 million with 14,000 people on it. So I know I can't be completely transparent, but when and where I can be transparent, absolutely I am. And I think that level of authenticity is going to help with that trust factor and terrible results that we see from the Gallup poll in figuring out, how do you solve this problem together? And the big thing that I want to close with on my comments here, because I take more time talking than everybody, apparently. We'll do an AI reading after this and see if that's a true statement. But Rosanne said, highlight the things that are working well. We have such a focus on the negatives, which, by the way, that whole system, I'm going to not even go down this rabbit hole because it's completely terrible. And most of the goals that are set are completely subjective and arbitrary and just terrible. But for the ones that are doing really good with the behaviors that you want to see and the outcomes that you're expecting and measuring, basically make them your spheres of influence, your frontline employees, celebritize them, do things that are going to make them feel really, engaged, right? Because then if other people, other cohorts see them, then guess what? They're not going to be like, oh man, I want them to leave me alone, so I'm just going to keep doing a terrible job and fly under the radar. No, they're going to want to be a part of that naturally. It goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. How can you, as a CEO, say, you know what, ego check, I don't need to be front and center on camera on every single video. Here is Trent, my frontline worker, who we introduced BalanceWise IQ for. He let us know what a great, process adherence, process improvement step through the tool. We took it and implemented that, and here he is. We made a cartoon out of him. That's a real offering, that we have and that companies can do to communicate way more effectively with their people. We got to get out of the old ways of doing things, recognize what are the current circumstances and variables and the weightings of those variables that are going to affect this change, and how do we effectively communicate it to make people feel more of an inclusive society and a more engaged society where you're seeing it measurably, their level of effort via the outcomes that you're asking and you're expecting them to produce.
I think great summary there. And so maybe to close here today, we're at 45 minutes. What I'd like to do is maybe in one sentence or a few words, what would be if you were king, queen of the day, and you could make that one decision or tell everybody, this is how you should be doing AI, what would you tell them? Rosanne?
Well, good question. I would say, we've been talking about it today, invest in your people. Doesn't matter having all the tools in the world. It can be the best tool in the world, but if you don't invest in your people and they're not on board and they're not skilled enough to use those tools, they are just going to be tools that will sit there. So invest in your people, upskill, capabilities, engagement, communities, make them feel heard on this journey.
I love it. I love it. Trent?
2 words: radical transparency. Make sure that everybody knows what you're doing and they understand why they're doing it, and involve them in the process. It's a complicated series of events to get to a really big change management process like this, but it requires trust, and that requires transparency and being involved.
I love it. Radical transparency. 2 words that I think are a struggle for a lot of organizations. Mr. Andreas, sir.
I would agree with that comment. I can point to Trent because he's right here on this side, and I can look up at Rosanne this way. I should have done that earlier. That would have been kind of cool. And we could have said it was AI doing that. I would just say our tagline, say hi to AI. Human intelligence, I'm going to put my hands up here for the visuals. Human intelligence and artificial intelligence. Figure out how you can get the most adoption from the symbiotic relationship that should be occurring there. Even if it's something as simple as, like Rosanne was saying, just starting with asking your people, how are you feeling? And then being able to say, without a level of fear of retaliation or whatever, of saying, I feel like crap today. You know what? All right, sorry. How can we help with that? How can we engage back with you? How can we start that journey? If I look at all of the different, theoretical starting points that could have the quickest quality outcome in the shortest time frame, like Trent was talking with the I think improvements that we're about to see in the next 4 to 6 months, I would say start with the frontline people. If you start with the frontline people, then the base of your business is going to improve, and it's going to help the integrity of the middle managers up through your organization, and you'll have a much faster accelerated adoption rate with not just AI. The topic is AI. We talked about AI a lot. But the balance of that is employee experience and everything else that can be, quote unquote, a byproduct of the passion that your team could have if you just start with your team. That was not 2 words. You asked for 2 words, right? All right.
It's okay. I always add a couple of zeros for you. It's just easier that way. And no, I think, first off, I want to thank all of you. I think this was a really informative, and you guys are doing this every day. So it's not just we made this stuff up. And I come away from this, a couple of key things. One, AI can't be done without understanding your people. And to your point, it's artificial intelligence has to have the human element to it. I think as long as we're serving people, right, whether it's B2B or B2C, there's a desire for it to be a human interaction. And I think where AI improves that and makes people, both parties, the consumer and the deliverer of whatever service or communication or whatever, both feel like they're getting to the value. What makes the value out of that engagement? That's where I think AI is going to be really valuable, and we'll see the adoption that we talk about. We'll see the ability to be transparent because we have the data and we're sharing the data, and the data tells us how we're getting better, how we're getting to our objectives as an organization, whatever those may be. So, again, I want to call out our production house team. Thank you, guys. I want to call out Rosanne, Trent, Andreas, spending the time with us today. I hope the audience got value out of it. I think this is an incredibly important conversation, and I suspect we'll be back in 6 months having another version of this with more and more learnings where it's gone well, and maybe even where companies have brought joy to the workplace by using better tools. That would be kind of fun. Maybe we can experiment with that, Andreas. We have some in-house stuff we can take away from this. All right. Well, with that, thanks, everybody. We really appreciate your time, and we'll say goodbye. Adios. Okay.
Introducing BalanceWise IQ, the game changer for modern workplaces. Powered by cutting-edge AI, it goes beyond just managing tasks. Imagine predictive insights that help prevent attrition before it starts. It's like having a modern-day idea box where every voice is heard. Plus, peer recognition tools boost engagement, making employees feel valued and connected. BalanceWise IQ fosters transparency, builds trust, and creates a culture where everyone thrives. Ready to transform your workplace? Experience the future of employee engagement with BalanceWise IQ.